It's Monday and you're watching FreightWaves Now. I'm your host and lead economist here at FreightWaves, Anthony Smith, and coming up I'll be doing a shipper econ update, but first we're going to go to Michael Vincent with a carrier update brought to you by PowerFleet. Stay tuned.
Good Monday morning to you. This is your carrier update brought to you by PowerFleet. I'm Michael Vincent. We got Thanksgiving this Thursday, Turkey Day coming up, so let's jump into it here. As we see on our outbound tender volume index, we had a rise throughout the end of last week, a little flat over the weekend, which is normal, but volumes up at 16,198. Cresting the highest they've been all year as we go into this holiday week. That is obviously putting some pressure on capacity, as you can quite imagine. If we look here at the trends over the last 2 years in the orange and the green, we can expect these volumes to rise as we go throughout the week, putting further pressure on capacity and rates as we normally see this time of year in the holidays. Moving forward to our outbound tender reject, if we look at this 28.20, almost 1 in 3 loads overall being rejected right now. Huge capacity constraint right now, and almost double that over 2018. Quite a high number. We expect that capacity to continue to tighten as we move through this week. Moving forward, let's break it down by van, reefer, and flatbed. So reefer in the orange, 49.17, surging over the last week, almost 1 in 2 loads being rejected on the reefer side. In the blue, we see the van tender rejects at 27.64, highest that they've been. Will it hit 30%? It's got a good shot at it as we move through this week. Drivers trying to get home for the holiday and surging volumes as we approach Thanksgiving. Flatbed even up at 14.64 as capacity starts to tighten there as well. If we look at our outbound tender reject in color and the outbound tender volumes in the height of the markets across the United States, we can see that volumes, Southern California here, quite high. Rejects, outbound tender rejects, not moving quite as much as in other markets. That's why the lighter blue, although they're still quite elevated. Atlanta, extremely high in its volume moves. And look up here throughout the Great Lakes in Chicago, Joliet up, Western Michigan up, and you can see Columbus, Ohio, and Harrisburg putting a lot of pressure on those markets up there with surging volumes overall. If we move forward, we can look at these in the van. Now, van outbound tender rejects are in the color, and the height of the markets is the volume. And you can see the effects on these. Volumes are very high here in van in Southern California, putting pressure on capacity in that market. But when we look over here in the Northeast, you see Columbus, Indianapolis, Chicago, Western Michigan, Harrisburg, all putting tremendous pressure on the capacity up in that area. As you see the tender rejects in Erie and Pittsburgh very, very high. Atlanta doing the same thing in the Southeast. If we look at the reefer tender rejects in the color and the reefer volumes in the height, we look at Jacksonville here, or the Tampa market over here, Lakeland market in Florida. Very, very high volume in reefer outbound there, putting tremendous, and Atlanta as well, putting tremendous pressure on the reefer capacity in the Southeast. Also, heavy volumes and high reject, tight capacity, Little Rock into Missouri as well, and up through the center of the country up into Minnesota as well. If we look at our outbound tender volume, we see outbound tender volume view here, high in Southern California, high in Atlanta, moving upwards in Harrisburg, etc. And we look at our strong tender rejects. The highest movers, Atlanta up 5.94 in capacity tightness, Omaha, Harrisburg up 5.44 at a 32% rejection rate, Macon, Georgia as well, Portland, even Chicago getting into it, Rockford, Illinois, Joliet, and Chicago, very high reject rates in these areas as well. As you can imagine, rates are going up through this week, and capacity is very, very tight in these major markets. So be careful out there. That's your carrier report. I'm Mike Vincent. Thanks for watching.
The comprehensive logistics offerings from PowerFleet cover in-cab ELD, fleet management, trailer tracking, cargo monitoring, and tracking other assets such as chassis and intermodal containers. Power up your operations with PowerFleet.
Welcome to your Shipper Econ Update. I'm your host and lead economist here at FreightWaves Anthony Smith, and today we're going to review the housing and construction market just a little bit. So behind me, just jumping in things, we have housing starts for single-family units, and so single-family units is going to make up the much more of the majority for the overall housing starts when we're looking at single-family versus multifamily units. And so what we saw in the most recent overall housing starts was a gain of roughly 4.9%, so nearly 5% on a month-to-month basis. But we just hit nearly not an all-time high, but the highest level since mid-2007. So this is a very significant number here. We're looking at a lot of momentum being built throughout the housing market. And so you're seeing that there's a lot of demand throughout the country for homes. And one of the big things that's driving it is, of course, that low mortgage rates that stay historically low, really prompting a lot of homeowners thinking that this is a good time to buy a home right now. When we're looking at this chart behind me, we have in the orange line the flatbed outbound tender rejection index, and so that's going to show the capacity constraints for the flatbed market. As of late, throughout the entire year, we haven't seen a lot of activity for manufacturing, but there is momentum building. So flatbed is really going to account for a lot of activity for not only manufacturing, but also construction materials. And what we're seeing here is that there is some increased capacity tightening when we're looking at what's going on with flatbed and some of the housing market. Next up, we're going to look at one of the hot areas for the housing market overall, and that's going to be the South region. The South region, right now, we see this is in the blue line, and that's nearly, that's going to be the big driver. That's nearly 56% of overall gains that's had in the last month for the housing starts overall. In the green line, we have we have housing starts for the new Northeast, and that's going to be the smallest portion of overall home purchases or starts overall when we're looking at housing starts. When we're looking at this, we're seeing a very contrast direction for both the blue line and the green line. And so in the green line, we can see that Northeast housing starts drastically falling, while that blue line, single-family overall housing starts for the South is indeed growing at a pretty consistent pace. This is likely going to be the case as we get towards the colder months. Not a lot of activity going to be happening in some of these seasonally cold winter months. So we're looking at New England, Northeast, New York, Vermont, a lot of these places like that, going to have a lot lower activity because the weather will not allow for some of those housing starts to happen. But when we're looking at overall housing construction, there is going to be a lot of demand, and there's a lot of implications for some of that demand. One of the things that we're going to look at here is that contrast difference between single-family starts, and in the orange line and in the blue line we have multifamily starts. So it really kind of shows where all the strength is happening right now. And we're looking at that happening from that single-family units. And that's going to be, I think, the tale for quite some time now as many individuals look to get out of major metropolitan areas and maybe closer to the suburbs. And so looking at this contrast, we can see that that is indeed the trend. Not to say that multifamily units aren't going to be coming back anytime soon, but there's going to be a lot less motivation for some of those multifamily units moving forward. Now, moving into some of the implications for housing starts moving up, this is also going to implement a lot more retail sales for building product materials. And so we can see that overall increasing for these building products materials and overall volumes moving throughout the country. This has been one of the bright spots of retail sales. Now, when we're looking at this is not going to be indicative of new home sales, but looking at those individuals that are maybe have a home already and are looking to make more purchases or make more improvements for their houses as we move throughout the year. This has really been the case. And so looking at what's going on here is really something that's going to be indicative of overhousing and looking at downward moving streams throughout the housing segment. That's going to do it for this update for the carrier shipper update. Thanks so much for tuning in. As always, you can check out all of our content on FreightWavesTV.com. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.